Hello and welcome to the Physical Preparation Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Robertson, and this is the August 2024 Q&A episode. Now, if it feels like it's been a little while since we did a Q&A show, it's because it's been a really, really long time since we did a Q&A show. I actually had to go back and look because in June, we did an IFAST Basketball Insiders Q&A call, which doesn't really count. In February, I believe it was, we did a program design Q&A, which is kind of along these same lines. But it was October 2023 since we did our last open-ended Q&A episode. So I'm super excited to do this, and I hope you're excited to listen as well. Now, before we dive in, I want to give you a quick recap of just kind of what's going on. And man, just real quick, I just want to highlight the last couple months of the podcast and what's coming up in the months to come, because we've had some amazing episodes. I mean, go back and listen. Andy Ryland, amazing show. Eric Huddleston, amazing show. Rick Franzblau, Vince Gabriel. The last month has just been amazing. So if this is your first episode ever, please go back and listen to those. Or if you maybe skipped a couple along the way, go back and listen to those because we've had some really great discussions. And then the next 2 months is just amazing coaches, amazing practitioners. We've got Charles Ashford, we got Jay DeMeo, James Collins, Joel Jameson, Victoria Saucedo, Adam Lewakano, Andrew Paul. I mean, these are amazing practitioners, guys. So if you're just getting back into this or you're just getting started, I am so pumped for the next month and a half, 2 months of shows. Now, I want to give you guys just a little bit of an insight because normally when I do these sorts of episodes, I give some insights as to what's going on. So I will do my best. I will give you the shortest life recap ever because I know a lot of people like these and they like to kind of know what's going on. I'm trying to share a little bit more personal stuff on IG again over the summer. It's really hard. I mean, just basketball off season is full-blown grind mode for me. And it's like this double whammy, right? And it's all good stuff. But all morning and into the early afternoon is working with my athletes, and we're in there, we're doing our jump testing and our assessments and our coaching and programming and all that good stuff. And that takes up an incredible amount of mental bandwidth. And then I come home and, in the afternoon, I've still got all the other stuff that goes on behind the scenes with RTS, whether it's writing programs, whether it's creating content, recording podcasts like this one. So the summer is just full-blown grind mode and I love it. But at the same time, it just doesn't leave a lot of extra room to get stuff done. And then on top of that, obviously my kids are home and I want to spend extra time with them. So basketball off season, I probably say this every year, but I feel like this was our most productive off season of all time. And I can say that with a lot of confidence because IFAST basketball in the gym is better than it has ever been. Like we have this amazing core group of athletes that have been coming in now, some for many, many years, some that are just getting started. But I mean, the highlight reel is pretty impressive and it takes a lot to impress me because I'm always kind of searching for the next thing or picking at my own work. But it's been really cool being able to use the Hawkin Dynamics plates, get under the hood and really make sure that, what I think I'm seeing with my athletes' movement is actually there. Right. And that I'm actually getting these objective results. And so I've got some athletes where literally their force plate metrics are just skyrocketing. So it's been really cool to show that, hey, I've identified the right areas, that the interventions are working, and that ultimately I'm getting that positive feedback from my athletes. So I've had some of that stuff going on. I've got 1 or 2 athletes that have had some pretty serious injuries that are coming back. I mean, I had one guy who literally 2 months ago was about ready to retire. His knees were that bad. And so, man, I had to really go back to the drawing board with this guy and figure out, okay, what options do we have? Where do we start? What's the low-hanging fruit? And man, over the last 2 months, this guy's been beyond committed, right? Talk about not cheating the training. He's there 5 days a week. He's working hard. He's never skipping reps. Whenever he can, he's adding just a little bit more load. And so this guy went from literally broken and wondering if he could play to feeling amazing, and he's getting back on the court and he's really excited about the next chapter in his career. So it's been an amazing basketball offseason. I'm sure I'll talk about that more, but it's just been really, really good. And so it just solidifies this thought process that I've had for the last 4 or 5 years now, that this is where I need to be spending the bulk of my time. So that was amazing. Obviously, summer went way too fast. If you have kids, the first couple, I feel seem like they take forever. And as they get older, Kate is in 5th grade now, which is crazy. Kendall is 13 and she's in 8th grade. Just feels like it flies by. So it's always weird. It's only 9 weeks, but you try and enjoy it as much as you can. It is hard because I do work a little bit more in the summer than I do the rest of the year. But I think we found a good balance, and it is nice because they're a little bit older now. We can stay up a little bit later. Got to play some pickleball. Kendall got some good soccer work in this off season. I don't know. It's fun. I'm enjoying my kids. Every phase of life is a little bit different. And I think that's, on one hand, really cool. On the other hand, it can be really scary because you start thinking, okay, in terms of summers, right? How many summers do I have left with Kendall in the house? How many summers do I have left with Cade in the house? So just trying to enjoy those moments with them. And it was kind of highlighted. We generally don't do like a big summer trip as a family just because I'm busy. And a lot of my athletes, now that they're coming from overseas, some of them I may only have 6 to 8 weeks. So we have this very condensed window of time to get work in. And I would feel very bad, on top of, I had a complete coach seminar where I missed a couple days. I had NBA Summer League where I lost a couple days. So if I were to just take like a week or 2 weeks off in the middle of summer, I would feel really bad about that. So instead of going for like a full-blown summer vacation, this year we just opted for like a little 3.5-day getaway. We went up to Michigan. It was awesome. It was my birthday weekend. Kendall made me these, oh my gosh, why am I blanking? Oh, carrot cake cheesecake bites. Now, if you know anything about me, two of my favorite things in life are cheesecake and carrot cake, and she merged them together into the most delicious sweet treat. So that's my amazing daughter. She made those for me. So it was just a nice little trip, got to get away, got to see, unbeknownst to us, we were up there, and then 30 minutes away, my best friend and his family were there at the same time. So we got to go spend a day together at the beach, went out to dinner. So it's just a really nice little trip. Just get away for 3.5 days. And again, no IG, no X or Twitter. I turned my phone almost completely off and I responded to nothing. So that was great. And then unfortunately, as soon as we're done with that, we're back into school. And so that's led to, actually, for me, like this really productive period, because up until this year, Kendall and Cade have been on drastically different schedules. Like Cade got on the bus at 7:20, Kendall didn't get on until 8:50. And then Cade got off the bus at 2:20, and then Kendall didn't get off till like 4:15. So there was this really weird window of time where it's only like 4 hours of quiet in our house. And now they're both on like a intermediate middle school schedule. So they both get on the bus at like 8:45. They don't get home till like 4:15. So I literally feel like I have 2 work days instead of 1. So if I've been a little bit more productive with the articles and the newsletters and all that good stuff, that's probably why, because I actually have like way more time in the middle of the day to get stuff done. So, it's a transition, just getting back into school routines and making lunches and all that stuff. But it's been really good. Cade is back in soccer this year. For those of you that are following my children's sports career, we just told him no more fall baseball. I don't know, unless your kid is like the next Ellie De La Cruz or Max Scherzer or just like some pro prospect, man, I think fall baseball where it's just like double headers on Sunday is the worst invention on the planet. I absolutely hate it. Like it's August and September. Sunday's maybe the day you would have off during the week or the weekend, and now you have to go play 4 to 5 hours of Little League baseball. So we just told him none of that this year. He's playing soccer. He's doing pretty well. There's definitely some conditioning that he has to reacquire and some foot skills, but it's just good. It's good to see him out there running around. He seems to be having fun with it. And then Kendall's obviously still playing soccer. She had her first tournament this weekend. The team as a whole did not play particularly well. It's just a young team. There's like all these different pockets of girls, right? There's like 4 girls from our old team, 4 girls from a different team, 4 girls that are new to the club. It's just all these new girls. So they're all trying to figure out where they land, what their positions are. The coach is trying to figure out all those things. But I think ultimately we'll be all right. Kendall had a great tournament. She's just really like figured out how to play. She's understanding pace. She's understanding spacing. She's starting to see the game faster. And so that's cool for me as a parent and as somebody that loves sports, just watching her evolve. So, man, probably a little bit longer than I wanted to go on that. But for those of you that are interested in what's going on with the fam and with my life, there it is. Now, I believe we have 5 Q&As today. So we're just going to go ahead and we are going to jump right in. This first question comes from Chad. And Chad wants to know, what lessons have you learned from opening IFAST Basketball Insiders so far? And are you still as excited about the project now as you were at the start? Man, this is a great question, Chad. And so for those of you that are unaware, over the last couple months, Bill and I shuttered IFAST University. He had his own, project that he wanted to work on, which is cool because I also wanted to dive more in the online space into continuing education for basketball S&C coaches. So when he started his own project, I decided this is a great time for me to start my own thing as well. And the first thing I learned is that building a new business still takes time. Now, I know this sounds really no duh, but to give you some perspective, I sold my first product on the internet. I believe it was in 2006. And that was a product called Magnificent Mobility. Now, prior to that, I'd never sold anything on the internet. I hadn't even sold online coaching before. So I started creating content, I believe it was in 2001 or 2002. I started writing for this small powerlifting magazine called Monster Muscle. So I start writing articles for them, and basically the trade was, hey, I'll write articles for you. They were giving me powerlifting equipment because I was competing in powerlifting at the time. Then fast forward to March 2023, I meet John Berardi at this random nutrition seminar. And if you guys know who JB is, he's kind of a big deal in the fitness space. And he was definitely at that point in time, as he was really kind of coming to the forefront of the industry. And he got me in at T Nation. So I think it was May 2003, I got my first article posted over at T Nation. So I created content for like 5 years before I ever sold anything. And needless to say, when Eric Cressy and I released Magnificent Mobility, it was crazy. Like the floodgates just opened and we sold a lot of stuff. So, it was pretty cool to watch. And as a result of that, since I've talked about fitness and personal training or strength and conditioning, since I've talked about those things for so long, I have a very high standard and a very high bar for when I launch a new product, I expect it to sell, a certain amount of units, right? Or make a certain amount of money. And so it's just been interesting because I've coached and I've worked with basketball players my whole life, right? Sometimes more than others, but especially like the last 8 or 9 years, that has been the bulk of my coaching in the gym. It's like 80-90% basketball. And so it's been interesting because it's taken me a while to sell this because let's be honest, I haven't talked about my work in the basketball space enough. It's not enough to just post some pictures of me with my guys at the end of the off season, or for me to flash some highlight reels of my guys when they're in their season. I need to be active and talking about my work in basketball, my thoughts on basketball, how I train basketball players. What do I do for strength work? What do we do for conditioning? How do we take people with dodgy knees and fix their knees up and get them healthy? So I haven't talked about it enough. So as a result, the market hasn't really been there. It is growing now because I'm actively talking about it more, and we're adding, a couple new people every week, which is exactly what I should have expected. I think I expected this massive, floodgate of customers to open, which we all do, right? It would be great if every time we launched a new product, the sky's open and like thousands of people are buying your product, but it doesn't work like that. So I've been more proactively talking about not only my work in the space, but the work that I'm doing in IFAST Basketball Insiders to help move that space forward. Because let's be honest, man, strength and conditioning in basketball is still like the Wild West. I've kind of like dipped my toes in the water here and there, but man, there's some really bad people doing some really bad things or things that just are downright ineffective. So I'm really just taking the same approach that I've always taken, right? Like, how do we educate basketball S&C coaches so they can ultimately get better results with their athletes? Now, the second question you had, Chad, was, are you still as excited about the project? And what's crazy is I think I'm actually more excited about the product now than when I opened. Because when we started, it felt like I was like just starting from scratch, right? IFAST University was this proven commodity. I think we'd had it open since 2016, 2017. It was a proven product. Like we had a system. We knew how to create content for it. We knew the Q&A calls. People knew what to expect, on a monthly basis from Bill and I. And so now this is like all my own thing. So I get to do whatever I want with it. And it's kind of liberating and it's very exciting. Like very exciting because now I can create whatever content I want. It's kind of my show, my game, but it's been really fun because every month I'm creating content that I'm incredibly passionate about. Right. So just so far in in the insiders area. We've got me talking about like the off-season training blocks I've created for high school athletes. So pretty cool, right? Like you can literally download my IFAST off-season basketball template that I would use with a high school basketball player for general purposes, and not only get the program, but me reviewing the program, like getting inside my head and understanding why I do that stuff. I have an entire module on return to play. So if somebody's coming off a sprained ankle, or maybe they've torn a meniscus, or they're coming off an ACL or an Achilles, hey, what does the return to play process look like? What are the principles involved there? I did an entire module on masking because, man, how many kids do we work with these days that are like 100 pounds dripping wet, right? They don't have just the body shape and the structure to compete at the highest level. So it's been really fun. It's been really rewarding. And I just feel like at the end of the day, the feedback I've gotten has been really amazing. And I ultimately just keep coming back to like, people need this. And, the final piece I'll say on this is that one thing I've realized going back through this process is I'm not just a coach, right? A lot of times when people say, oh, what do you do? I'll say, I'm a personal trainer, or I'm a strength and conditioning coach. And part of that is just to deflect, because I don't want to explain to people like all the stuff that I do in a given day. But I'm more than just a coach. And I really at heart believe that I'm a teacher. And so that's what I love about coaching. I get to teach my athletes how to move better, how to use their body to be more effective playing their game. But I don't have interns at IFAST anymore. So I need somebody to coach. So, the people that are a part of IFAST Basketball Insiders are getting the best of me, and they are getting like my best insights into how I coach and how I develop my basketball players. So Chad, great question, man. Long story short, I'm absolutely loving it. And I hope everybody that's a part of the team so far is enjoying it as well. The feedback I've gotten is amazing. And I fully expect, as I really hit a rhythm and a routine over the next 6 to 12 months, things are really going to move in the right direction. So great question, Chad. Appreciate it. Next, we have Chris. And Chris has a little bit longer question. So I'll read it all just to give you some context. Chris says, I'm jumping into the deep end of starting my own business. First off, congrats, Chris. That's awesome. Now, he says, I'll be coaching training with nutritional support online and some in person at my house. What are some general tips you'd give to someone like me? He goes on to say, I'm confident I can help someone lose weight, get jacked, move and feel better, or all three. I've also helped people make fitness a part of their lifestyle when it never was in their life. Now, I know that's a broad question, but hopefully you can give a nugget or two with that question. You're the man, Mike. Well, again, first off, Chris, kudos to you. This will simultaneously be the most awesome and most scary thing you might ever do in your entire life. So kudos to you. Being an entrepreneur is not for everyone, but man, if you can really just like burn the boats and jump into the deep end, and I'm sure I could think of another cliche if you wanted, but man, it can be the most rewarding experience with regards to personal growth and development. So kudos to you. Now, the downside to this is that instead of taking one job, which you think you have, which is, coaching people via, online or in-person training, nutrition, all that, that's one job. But you also just added 3 more jobs to your plate, whether you know it or not. So now that you have checked the coaching box, you have also just added to your plate any operations or systems work that you need to develop. Probably not a ton early on because it's just you, but you have definitely added marketing and sell it. So these are 2 areas where if you do not strive to master them, you will never be successful. And I hate to say it with that level of threat because I don't want to feel threatening, but it's critically important. So if you didn't listen to the podcast I did a couple weeks ago with Vince Gabriel, absolutely go and listen to it right now because we talk a ton about marketing and selling. He gives some great general advice there. But I want to give you a couple pieces of my own because I think they'll be beneficial. And if you actually take the time to not just listen to what I'm saying, but take action and work through some of these steps, I think it'll be incredibly valuable to you. So number 1, I want you to very clearly identify who is your target market. And Chris, we have talked about this before because Chris is actually a former online client of mine. You got to get really clear on who you're coaching and who you're talking to. And once you have done that, then you need to figure out, okay, what is my language that I'm going to use with them? Now, it's a lot easier if you are in your own demographic, right? I think the easiest person to coach is the person who is very similar to you. You're just a couple steps ahead of them in the game of life. So, if you want to coach 30-year-olds, you're a 40-year-old and you've been through all those trials and tribulations that go on when you're 30, like, maybe getting married or having kids or going through a divorce. You've got all this relatability built in. You've got that entire decade of buffer to talk to them and say, hey, look, like, I get where you're coming from. So I think understanding your target market and then being able to speak directly to them is critically important. And I would tell you, you need to start doing that right now. Like, start integrating yourself into these people's lives, whether it's on social media, whether it's a newsletter list. You have to figure out the best way to communicate with them. But in all honesty, if you can do as many as possible, again, Vince talks about the marketing glove, having like 5 different ways. I think that's ideal. So if I start thinking about that just for me, I've got articles, I've got my podcast, I've got videos, I've got my newsletter, I've got social media. I've got a lot of different ways where somebody can come into my universe, and you need to do the same. Another piece of marketing advice that I think is of critical importance is being really clear that once you know who you're talking to and who your target market is, be okay excluding everybody else. And this has been so hard for me. And I'll be honest, Chris, this is something that I have struggled to do numerous times throughout my career. I always want to be like, oh, I don't want to alienate this group. Or what if this person wants to spend money with me? Like, look, at the end of the day, you need to have the Dan Kennedy mindset. And Dan Kennedy talks about magnetic marketing. So if you think about the 2 ends of a magnet, right? If you put north and north together, they repel, right? And that's okay, because what you want are the north and the south. They attract each other. And that's what you're trying to do with your target market. You want to talk so passionately to them that they feel like, oh my gosh, Chris really gets me. This is the guy I need to be working with. And the other people, it doesn't matter, right? Because if you end up trying to speak to everybody, ultimately you attract nobody. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons in marketing. Get really clear on who you're talking to, figure out what drives them, what pains they're dealing with, what they're struggling with, and then talk directly to them. And then kind of always remember that, logic is a big part of it, but a lot of people buy on emotion. So don't shy away from that. And share your story, because you've got such a unique story as well. The other piece to this, once you have done marketing, is selling. So before you start trying to market and before you start having people reach out to you and say, oh, Chris, man, I love your story. I'd love to work with you. Before you go through any of that, get really clear on what it is you're selling and what that's going to cost. Because one of the biggest mistakes I see online entrepreneurs make is they, jump in and they're creating all this content, and then somebody's like, oh yeah, let's go. I'm ready to sign up. And they're like they don't even know what they're really offering. So get clear on, okay, if you're training people in your house, how are you going to sell that? Are you selling single sessions? Are you selling like monthly packages that renew, which would be great? Anytime you can get a recurring model going would be great. If you're selling nutrition stuff, what does that look like? Get really clear on exactly what these people are getting. And then as you're going through that, another little tidbit that'll help with the marketing side of this as well is getting clear on not just like what they get, right? But what it means to them, right? So don't just sell features, right? Like 3 times per week coaching. What is the benefit of that? Well, now they're going to get a one-on-one personal training experience with you. They're going to get built-in accountability and motivation. So don't just think about what they're getting. Think about what it really means to them. So one of the things that a lot of marketing people talk about is features versus benefits. So when you're selling or you're marketing, don't just think about features, right? The X's and O's. Think about what it really means to them. Okay? So how are you going to demonstrate value? And then I would get really clear and have this all written out. Like, what's your marketing strategy? What's your selling strategy? And once you have that, now you're in a really good place to get this thing going. Okay. So the last piece of advice I'll give, right? Because we talked about, you got to have your coaching, operations, marketing, selling. This is arguably the most important thing, right? So if you're just now locking into what I'm saying, write this down. If you own your own business, if you work for yourself, if you collect your own monies, right now, stop the show, go to Amazon and buy Profit First. Once you have bought Profit First, read it cover to cover. Don't just file it away. Literally take that book and apply it. The most painful thing in that book is creating 5 different bank accounts. And trust me, didn't have to do it once. I had to do it twice, right? Because all my bank accounts through RTS are through Chase, and all my bank accounts from IFAST are through KeyBank. It's a hassle, yes, but it is the single most effective financial thing you can do, because it's going to ensure that you pay yourself first. Most importantly, it's going to ensure that you always, when it comes time to pay taxes, have money to pay taxes. Because let me tell you, it's only happened once, but I had 1 year where I absolutely slayed. Like, everything that I sold absolutely blew up, had an amazing year, didn't set enough money aside. So it was really cool until April 20th of the next year. And I had to write just a ridiculously large tax check. So not coincidentally, read Profit First after that. I've applied it ever since, and I've never had an issue meeting a tax payment ever since. So you live and you learn, but trust me, if you own your own business, if you sell your own stuff, if you collect your own monies, buy Profit First and start using that system. So Chris, I hope that helps you out, man. Gives you some clarity. Again, super excited for you. And I'm sure with all the other successes you've had over the last couple of years of your life that you're going to absolutely crush this one as well. Okay, moving on. This question comes from Vicky. Vicky wants to know, what are your big rocks for off-season training with your basketball players? So yeah, Vicky, you've obviously been following the IG here lately because I've been trying to post more pictures, just more thoughts on training as a whole. And what I've actually tried to do more this year is I've just given up on me following my dudes around with a camera. Like, if you do that and you can be a successful coach, kudos, good for you. I am just not, it's not in my DNA, right? I feel like if I've got my phone on me the whole time, people are texting me or I'm getting notifications, like it's just a constant distraction. So to kind of mitigate that, what I decided to do this year was a couple times, and I'll probably do it even more next year, is just have a professional photographer come in. Hey, dude, just shoot pictures, right, for 2 hours. And I try and get, different days. So you get some upper body days, you get some lower body days, you get some days where we're doing assessments on the force plate. You got other days where we're training on the Exerfly. Like, it just gives a lot of energy when you have that kind of stuff. And it's great on the back end because I can highlight my athletes. I can use it in my presentations. I can use it for IFAST Basketball Insiders. So, Vicky, back to your question. It really depends on if I'm training like a young developing, like a middle or high school age athlete, somebody that's still got room in the adaptation tank, or if I'm training a veteran or a professional that's been doing this for years or maybe even a decade or more. So with my young hoopers, and this has been fun because I've had more of these in the last couple years. Again, as my kids have gotten older and it's given me a little bit more time in the afternoons to do this, I've gotten more or back into the high school ranks more. And so for me, this is so much fun because this is actually about development, right? These guys are not finished products, and girls, for the record. These guys and girls, they're not finished products. Like, there's adaptations to be had, whether it's improving their first step, building a better set of breaks, improving their vertical jump. Like, this is so much fun for me because with a lot of my pros, I don't have to do that, or I don't get to do that. So this is where I just get to ask myself, okay, what do they need? We get to get in, we get to do all of the movement testing. So I'm watching them do accelerations, doing closeouts. I'm watching them shuffle side to side. I'm just looking at their general movement mechanics. So we get to dive in and we really get to break down like their basketball specific movements, right? And if you follow this kind of stuff, go listen to Lee Taft, right? Listen to one of the podcasts that he's done, or follow Lee on IG or YouTube. He's fantastic. But we get to dive in and we get to really coach their movement. From a training perspective, we got to figure out, okay, man, why can't this person jump? Why is their first step so slow? We just really get to get under the hood and we get to build, bigger breaks, a better engine. Like, it's really, really fun because I've done so much high level, like pro athlete training. I don't get to do as much of that. We don't get to really push that envelope as much. So if I got a young athlete, I'm thinking development. If I'm training a pro, then I'm almost breaking the off season down into phases. And I'm just going to preface this by saying at some point, like in the next couple of months, this is going to be an IBI post. Like, this is going to be a full like premium post, because I think this is where people really make some mistakes. I think too often, especially say you get your first pro in, you're like, oh man, I'm going to get in my S&C bag here and I'm going to throw all this stuff at them. And yeah, it looks cool. And maybe that it even feels okay early on, but by the time the season rolls around, they're already feeling beat up again, right? Or some of those aches and pains are already flaring up. And if they're having issues in the preseason or early on in the competitive year, dude, I hate to tell you, they are going to be struggling. By the time March, April, May comes around, they are not going to be feeling great. So for me, I tend to break that off season down. Kind of that first block is really just getting them right and getting back to training. So for instance, my guys that have gone overseas, some of them literally left. Keelan left August 7th, and he may not get back until the end of May or early June. So, I mean, just do the math on that. That's a 10-month competitive season. So the first thing I'm trying to do is just make sure that they feel good again. So I'm thinking about getting them right, getting back into training. I'm thinking about working on deficiencies. And so that's where like this really thorough assessment comes into play, and it's continuing to evolve. And, you know, now it's beyond just the movement stuff, but I'm looking at their force plate data. I'm looking at their true strength stuff, which I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around now. But I'm having the ability to do more isolated strength testing, so we can really dive in and say, okay, what's their quad strength? What's their soleus strength? So we can really find those weaknesses and deficiencies and start to iron those out before we get back into full-blown training. And so really, if you've only got somebody 8 weeks, it could take 4 to 5 just to get to a point where they feel pretty good. And then at the end, it's like, okay, now we're just trying to top those outputs back off. So I'm not necessarily trying to take their vertical jump up from their old standard, but I'm at least trying to get back to their old standard, trying to get them back to baseline so they can go and have another solid year, right? Ultimately, the goal is each and every year, if you're not improving performance outputs, which is kind of sad for us, but if you're getting them back to that baseline, they feel healthy, they feel strong, their outputs are back where they need to be, hey man, they're set and ready to go have another good year. And the way this game goes is, hey, the longer you can stay in the game, the more money you can make, the better opportunities you have. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to add longevity to these guys' careers so they can play as long as they want and they can maximize their earning potential. So like I said up top, Vicky, this is a great question. I'm going to do a whole video on this because I think it's worth it. And I think it's worth helping people understand, like, this is exactly my thought process and how I go about doing it. But from like a 30,000 foot view, that's kind of my approach. So I really hope that helps. Great question. Next, we have a question from Susie. Susie says, my question is, when you had employees, when did you offer growth opportunities such as a pay raise or a bonus? Were there any metrics you were using to measure their performance in their position, and how often do these conversations happen? I work at a small studio and I'm considering asking for a raise. So Susie, first off, kudos to you. I love the question, and I will direct you. Don't worry, guys. If I keep saying listen to this show or listen to this podcast, I'll put it in the show notes. But I would strongly recommend listening to my podcast with Scott Charland first. Man, we cover a lot of the taboo topics, like talking about pay raises, talking about how much each other is making. And it's taboo because, you know, a lot of times we haven't had these discussions. We're not willing to put it out there. But I think the more we talk about it, the more it empowers us, right, as a community, as an industry, versus benefits the people that are employing us. So I would have no issue talking about these things. So for starters, since IFAST is not the same business structure as it was before, I'm willing to give you like all the details. But essentially the way we paid our employees at IFAST was they had a base hourly rate. Let's just say it was $15 an hour. So they have a base rate. And then for every extra client they trained in that hour, they earn an additional $5 per hour. So let's say it was 15 for nobody, 20 for one, 25 for two, 30 for three, 35 for four. So that was like your base rate, right? Or your base setup. Now from there, we added incentives. So if somebody got a CSCS or a high level credential, we added $1 per hour across their compensation. For anybody that went on and got a master's degree, we added an extra $1. Beyond that, we also had profit sharing bonuses. Again, that comes from Profit First. And then last but not least, there was also a program design fee. So I forget what it was. I think towards the end, it was closer to $15. But for every program you wrote, there was a $15 basically program design fee. So, you know, for working I think some of our top earners, if you were working in the afternoons, afternoons were always the busiest, right? If you looked at at our utilization rate, generally, if we were busy, it was like 85, 90%. You'd maybe have like 1 hour where you weren't full, or maybe 2 hours where maybe just one person was off. You could easily make in a 25-ish hour work week, you could make north of 50K, which is pretty good, right? Like the downside was there's only certain times you can get people to come in and train. Like I couldn't stack those hours between 12 and 3 and fill them the same way. But that's how we set things up. So that gives you an idea of our overall like compensation package. Now, as far as we called them PDIs, or personal development interviews. And I believe that's from Traction, which is a really good book on just like running your business and systems and how to run better meetings within your business. But what we did was twice a year in January and July, we would be doing our personal development interviews. Okay. And for us, the biggest thing was focusing on their development and growth as a coach. Now, I know this can sound kind of nebulous, but you got to think, like I'm on the floor a lot of those hours, right? Maybe it's not as much with our afternoon coaches, but I'm around enough and I can watch these guys and girls and I can see if they're developing. I can see how they're writing programs. They're off on the other side of the gym and I'm kind of like looking at the athlete, looking at their program. I'm looking at the cues. I'm looking at their interactions with people. So I'm constantly observing whether they're getting better or not. Okay. So we would have, these meetings in January and July, and it would always be Bill, myself, and then the coach. And we just try and get a feel for, okay, where are you at? We'd give them feedback, what they're doing well. And then from there, we would generally give them like one thing to continue working on. And again, that was something that Bill and I would discuss outside of the scope of that meeting. We'd have some back and forth before, and then we'd go into the meeting and say, hey, here's one thing we'd like you to work on. Or in some cases, when we felt like somebody was developing the way that we wanted, we'd turn it around and ask them, hey, what's next for you? Like, what's the next thing you want to dive in on? And so that's really cool because now we don't need to direct that. Like they're taking it upon themselves and they're self-aware in what they need to work on to become a higher level coach. So as far as the actual raise went, I think it was very rare come a July, because that was when we would always give our raises. It was rare or almost never where somebody wouldn't get a raise at that point in time, because we didn't have people, we just didn't have coaches that didn't want to be successful, whether it was Jay Chung, whether it was Ty Terrell, whether it was Eric Huddleston, whether it was Dave Schock, like all of these guys, they all wanted to improve. They all wanted to get better, and they all had these paths carved out for themselves. Right. And that's why, they went on and they worked for the Atlanta Hawks or the Indiana Pacers. Dave works for himself now. Jay moved out of the industry, but he was incredibly successful when he was with us. So, that's kind of how we did it. I think once a year is fine. If your boss or employer wants to do it twice a year, that's fine as well. I think that can get a little bit cumbersome. But I think at least once a year, you should be having that discussion. And I would flip this around on you as well. And I know Scott and I talked about this, but if you're going to ask for a raise, you better come well armed, right? Because I'm not going to tell you as an employer that I'm not willing to give you a raise, but I want you to go to bat for yourself. Like, why do you deserve this? What are you doing to get better? And this may be even more true if you don't have the same level of interaction or supervision from your employer. So if they're around you all the time and they can watch you work and they're seeing your personal growth, it may not be an issue, but I would still do this just so that when you walk into that meeting, you can say, hey, look, I went to these seminars this year. I did these courses. My usage rate went from 75 to 80%, or, whatever metrics you guys track. I'd be going in there with guns blazing so that you can very clearly state, hey, here's what I'm doing that's over and above where I was last year. Pay me the monies. So, Susie, I hope that helps you out. I think this is a great question. I think it's something we need to be discussing more openly in our industry. And again, make sure you listen to the interview with Scott, because I think it'll help. Now, last but not least, we have a question from Scott. Scott says, should coaches discuss politics on social media? So I figure this will be a fun one to end on. Now, before you just, stop the show, I'm going to be very neutral and very balanced here because I like to think from a political perspective, I am pretty balanced, right? Like I definitely have my leanings, like all of us, but I'd like to hear all sides of the spectrum. I like to read Fox News and I like to read CNN. I don't always like how I feel afterwards, but I want to find this like balanced approach. And if you're interested, I think it's like 1440 newsletter. It's something that Joel told me about maybe about a year ago now. And I really like that because it's like this very like unbiased and balanced approach to the news. They do a weekly newsletter, or sorry, a daily newsletter. So I believe that's 1440. So if you're interested in that, I'll try and remember to put a link in the show notes. But as far as should you discuss politics on social media, if you are a coach, I'm going to give you a very general answer at the beginning, and that is it depends. I think if you're on the public side, right, if you represent an organization, like if you work in the NBA, NHL, MLB, MLS, if you work for a business that is not your own, I will just say do that at your own risk. Because in case you haven't noticed, we are in a very politically charged environment now. You can't say anything on the internet without it coming back to you. And you could probably have 2 followers on your X or Twitter account, and you say something that is, very left or right leaning politically, and you're going to get some traction with it. It's crazy the way this is working right now. So my advice would be, especially if you're a young coach, right, and you don't even know what you don't know, whether it's about politics or it's about just the social network of life, right, and interacting with other humans, I would say, by all means, I would probably stay away. Just better to be safe than sorry. And I would say, let's just take that one more level. Just be careful of anything you put on social media, because I know incredibly high-level coaches, incredibly high-level character individuals that have lost the opportunity to get jobs because of things they said on social media when they were like 14 and 15 years old. It's crazy. If you don't think that your employer will go and search your social media profiles to learn more about you, to see if there's any dirt or anything that could in any way, shape, or form negatively impact their business, you are wrong. Okay? So I would say, especially if you are a young person, when in doubt, do not post it. Now, on the other side of this, I do think there's another side. And this is where this may ruffle some feathers, but it comes back to this idea of magnetic marketing. So on the private side, let's say you own your own gym or you own your own business. It's very personality driven, right? It really comes down to how much heat are you willing to take. So let's say you own a gym and you are very left or right leaning. Okay, that's fine. If you're willing to throw it out there and you're willing to deal with the heat, that's totally cool, because here's what it will do. I mean, you want to talk about politics, right or left side? You start, hey, I own a gym. I'm super conservative. I like to shoot guns and, I'm all about religion and faith or whatever. Hey, man, there are certain people they will gravitate towards you, right? So there is an element of attraction to this. Now, you don't have to like this, right? You don't have to like that the world is this way, but it's true, right? The same thing goes on the other side. If somebody's very liberal, very open, minded, whatever, they're going to have their own things that will attract people to them, right? So I'm not going to say one is right or one is wrong, but I will tell you this. Like, look, if you want to have a personality driven business, and if you want to be like the star of the show and you want to attract a certain client, a certain customer base, by all means, maybe that works really well for you, because I tell you what, you will have the attraction effect, right? You will get the people that like your message, that like your mindset, that like your political leanings, and you will drive the other half away. So it's really up to you. And I know that's kind of a wishy-washy answer, but I would just say, look, if you're representing somebody else, it's probably not the best case. Definitely if you're young, keep all that stuff off the internet. Again, I just don't think there's a time and a place for it at that point in your life. As you get older, as you see more things, you have more experiences, and you want to have those discussions, maybe you can go there. But again, just realize that, look, if your employer doesn't like what you're saying, that could cost you your job. And then if you're in the private side, hey, man, it's really up to you. And it depends on what kind of business you want to run. But if you want to play the magnetic marketing game and you want your political leanings and your ideologies and your beliefs to be a big part of that, and you want to use that to bring a certain customer into your community, it could work really well. And you don't have to like it, right? You don't have to like the fact that the world works like that, but the fact of the matter, it does work like that. And for some people, they've driven incredibly high revenue businesses based off their personality and their political beliefs. So, all right, my friend, that does it for today. That was a lot of questions. I mean, really only 5, but we covered a lot of ground here, right? We talked about IFAST Basketball Insiders and how it takes time to grow a business. We talked about starting your own business and how you just earned yourself 3 more jobs, but really driving home the importance of understanding marketing and selling if you want to be successful. We talked about big rocks for basketball players. And, if you got young people, hey, you get to develop them. It's probably more fun. You get to get after it a little bit more. Whereas if you're training pros, it may not be as exciting. It's exciting because you're training high-level individuals, people who get paid to play their sport. But the training itself, in a lot of cases, isn't quite as sexy and as exotic. We talked about negotiating pay raises, and we talked about politics on social media. So lots of ground covered. I hope you enjoyed it. With that being said, if you enjoyed this show, if you are not already subscribed to the Physical Preparation Podcast, please go and do that right now. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, wherever you consume shows like this, go and hit the like, follow, subscribe, whatever button we're calling it these days, so that you know each and every week when a new episode drops. So my friend, as always, thank you so much for your support. Love and appreciate you. And we'll be back next week with our next episode. Take care.